Emma lived a life of comfort. She had everything: a big house, expensive clothes, and delicious food on the table every day. She never had to worry about where her next meal would come from, or if she would have a warm place to sleep at night. But one evening, as she walked home from school, something caught her eye that made her heart ache. Near a small bakery on the corner of the street, a boy sat curled up against the cold wall. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face smudged with dust, and his arms wrapped tightly around himself, as if trying to stay warm. He looked no older than 10, maybe 11. His eyes, dark and tired, stared at the ground, as if he had given up on the world. Emma stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. She had never seen him before, and something about him made her pause. People walked past him without a second glance, treating him as if he were invisible. She watched as a man stepped out of the bakery, holding a bag of fresh, warm bread. The delicious smell filled the air. The boy lifted his head slightly, his eyes following the bag, his lips parting as if he could almost taste it. But the man walked away without even noticing him. Emma felt a lump in her throat. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Daniel after that evening. His tired eyes, his small, thin hands holding the bread so carefully. It stayed in her mind long after she went home. She sat at the dinner table with her family, surrounded by fancy dishes and more food than she could ever eat in one meal. But instead of enjoying it, she kept thinking about Daniel. Had he finished the bread? Was he still hungry? Where did he sleep at night? The questions wouldn't leave her mind. The next day, Emma made a decision. After school, she would go back to the same spot near the bakery and see if he was there. Maybe she could bring him more food. She couldn't explain why she felt so strongly about it, but she knew one thing: she wanted to help him. When school ended, she rushed to the bakery, her heart pounding. What if he was gone? What if she never saw him again? But as she turned the corner, her heart lifted. He was there, sitting in the same spot, his arms wrapped around himself just like the day before. Emma smiled and walked up to him. "Hi, Daniel," she said cheerfully. He looked up, surprised. He blinked a few times, as if he couldn't believe she had come back. "Hi," he said softly. She pulled a small paper bag from her school bag and handed it to him. "I brought you something." Daniel hesitated before taking it. He opened the bag carefully, and his eyes widened when he saw a sandwich, a small apple, and a juice box inside. He looked up at her, his lips slightly parted, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Go on, eat," Emma encouraged. Slowly, Daniel picked up the sandwich and took a bite. Emma noticed how he chewed slowly, making each bite last as long as possible. He glanced at her a few times, as if unsure why she was doing this. "Do you like it?" she asked. He nodded quickly. "It's really good," he mumbled between bites. Emma smiled. "I can bring you more if you want." Daniel stopped eating for a moment and looked at her carefully. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Emma thought for a moment before answering. "Because I want to. And because no one else is." Daniel didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her, like he wasn't used to kindness, made Emma's heart ache. And so, this became their routine. Every day after school, Emma would stop by the bakery and find Daniel waiting there. She would bring him food, sometimes an extra sweater from home, and even some books she no longer needed. At first, Daniel hesitated to accept anything more than food, but over time, he began to trust her. Emma learned more about him too. His parents had died in a car accident when he was very young. He had been placed in different foster homes, but nothing ever worked out. Eventually, he ended up on the streets, fending for himself. Despite his tough life, Daniel was smart. He loved to read, and when Emma gave him a book, his eyes would light up with excitement. "I want to be a doctor one day," he told her once, his voice filled with quiet determination. Emma smiled. "Then you will be." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Doctors need schools, Emma, and schools need money." "Who says you can't?" she asked. "You're smart, smarter than most kids in my class." Daniel didn't answer, but for the first time, Emma saw a small flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, he could dream again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Every afternoon, Emma would rush to meet Daniel, carrying a bag of food and sometimes a few extra things, a warm jacket, a pair of gloves, or a book she thought he might like. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing day. Emma loved hearing Daniel talk about his dreams. He wanted to be a doctor, not just for himself, but to help others who had no one to care for them. His words always made Emma smile. "You'll be a great doctor one day," she told him once. Daniel gave a small laugh. "You really think so?" "I know so," she said confidently. "You just need a little help." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite describe. Gratitude, hope, maybe both. But as much as Emma enjoyed their secret friendship, she knew she had to keep it hidden from her parents. They wouldn't understand. Her father always told her to stay away from people like Daniel, saying they were dangerous or lazy. But Emma knew that wasn't true. Daniel was kind, hardworking, and full of dreams. He just never got the chances that she did. One evening, as she was sneaking some extra food from the kitchen, her mother walked in. "Emma, what are you doing?" she asked, frowning. Emma froze. I was just getting some snacks for later," she lied. Her mother gave her a strange look but didn't question it further. Emma let out a sigh of relief. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want to risk losing her time with Daniel. The next day, Emma hurried to the bakery as usual, excited to see Daniel. But when she reached the spot where he always sat, her heart sank. He wasn't there. The wall was empty, the cold pavement untouched. Emma looked around, her chest tightening. Maybe he was just late. Maybe he had gone to find food somewhere else. She decided to wait. She sat on the pavement, hugging her bag close, glancing around every few minutes. People walked past, some giving her strange looks, but she didn't care. Minutes turned into an hour, still no sign of him. A worried feeling settled deep inside her. Daniel had never missed a day before. He always waited for her, even in the rain, even when he wasn't feeling well. Something was wrong. The next day, she came back. Still no Daniel. She asked around, stopping strangers on the street. "Have you seen a boy? Dark hair, about this tall, usually sitting right here." But no one knew anything. Some barely even listened before walking away. Her heart felt heavy as she walked home. That night, she barely touched her dinner. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where he had gone. Had something bad happened to him? Was he hurt? Was he alone somewhere, scared and hungry? For days, she searched, but it was as if Daniel had disappeared from the world. Emma never got to say goodbye. She never got to tell them that he mattered, that he wasn't alone. And worst of all, she never knew if he was safe. She didn't know it then, but this wasn't the end of their story. Fate had a plan, one that would bring them back together in a way she never could have imagined. Years passed, but Emma never forgot Daniel. Every time she passed by the old bakery, she would slow down, hoping to see a familiar face sitting there. But he never returned. It felt as if he had vanished into thin air. She often wondered what had happened to him. Did he find a safe place? Did he get the help he needed? Or was he still struggling, alone in the world? These thoughts never truly left her mind, even as life moved forward. Emma grew up, just as everyone expected her to. She finished school, went to college, and eventually started working in her family's business. From the outside, her life looked perfect. She had money, a good career, and a bright future ahead of her. But deep down, something always felt missing. She had everything, yet there was a strange emptiness in her heart, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. Her days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and business trips. She barely had time for herself, always caught up in the rush of work. Her father was proud of her, always saying she was smart and responsible. But Emma often felt tired. The long hours, the stress, it was starting to take a toll on her. She ignored the small signs at first. A little dizziness here, a slight headache there. She brushed them off, thinking it was just exhaustion. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Emma felt unusually weak. As she walked towards her car, her vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness hit her. She reached for the car door, but before she could open it, everything went dark. When she woke up, she was in a hospital bed. The bright lights, the beeping machines, it all felt distant, like a dream. She blinked, trying to clear her mind. A nurse stood beside her, adjusting the IV in her arm. "Miss Emma, you're awake," the nurse said gently. Emma tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her chest stopped her. What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. "You collapsed," the nurse explained. "You were brought here just in time." A doctor walked in, holding a clipboard. He looked serious, but his eyes were kind. "Miss Emma, you have a heart condition," he said. "It's rare, but it can be treated. You need surgery soon, or it could become dangerous." Emma's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from shock. She had never thought about her health before. She had always been so focused on work, on responsibilities, that she ignored the warning signs. And now, here she was, lying in a hospital bed, hearing words she never expected to hear. She swallowed hard. Who will do the surgery?" The doctor smiled slightly. "One of our best surgeons. He'll be in to see you soon." Emma nodded, feeling overwhelmed. She had always been the one taking care of things, making decisions. Now her life was in someone else's hands. She closed her eyes, trying to stay calm. She had no idea that the doctor who was about to walk through that door was someone she had met years ago, someone whose life she had unknowingly changed. Emma lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was racing. A heart condition. Surgery. It all felt unreal. Just a few days ago, she was busy with work, handling meetings, and planning her future. And now she was here, helpless, waiting for a doctor to save her life. She had always been in control of everything, but now she had no control at all. Her parents arrived soon after, their faces filled with worry. Her mother sat by her side, holding her hand tightly, while her father spoke to the doctors, demanding to know every detail of her condition. For the first time in years, Emma saw real fear in their eyes. It made her realize how serious things were. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart," her mother whispered, stroking her hair. "You're strong." Emma nodded, trying to believe it. But deep inside, she was scared. Later that evening, a nurse walked in with a warm smile. "Your surgeon will be here in a few minutes to talk to you," she said gently. "He's one of the best." Emma nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She had met many doctors in the past 2 days, but this was the one who would decide her fate. She clenched her hands together, feeling her heart pound in her chest. A few minutes later, the door opened. A tall man in a white coat walked in, a clipboard in his hands. His steps were confident, his posture straight. But when Emma looked up at his face, her breath caught in her throat. He had changed. He was older, taller, dressed in a doctor's uniform. But those eyes, those dark, familiar eyes, Emma knew them. "Hello, Miss Emma," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I'm Dr. Daniel Carter. I'll be your surgeon." Emma's world seemed to stop. She stared at him, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now. Daniel. It was him. The boy she had fed all those years ago. The boy she had searched for, but never found. And now he was standing in front of her, holding her medical chart, about to perform the surgery that could save her life. Daniel looked at her carefully, as if studying her reaction. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but he remained composed. He didn't say anything personal, didn't acknowledge their past, at least not yet. Emma opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. A wave of emotions crashed over her: shock, joy, disbelief, and something else she couldn't quite name. She wanted to ask him where he had been, how he had become a doctor, if he remembered her, but she couldn't speak. Instead, Daniel continued talking, explaining the details of the surgery, the risks, the recovery process. His voice was steady, reassuring. He was a different person now, confident, successful, and in control. When he finished, he looked at her and finally said something that wasn't part of his medical speech. His lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to worry," he said softly. "You once helped me when I needed it the most. Now, it's my turn to help you." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She had never believed in fate, but at that moment, she wasn't so sure. Emma couldn't believe it. The little boy she had once fed every day, the one she had worried about for years, was now the doctor who would save her life. She stared at Daniel, her mind spinning. He had changed so much. His once thin frame was now strong. His tired eyes were now full of confidence. But deep down, she knew it was him. "Daniel," she finally whispered, her voice shaky. "It's really you." A soft smile touched his lips. "Yes, Emma," he said gently. "It's me." Tears welled up in her eyes. She had searched for him for so long, wondering where he had gone, if he was safe, if he had found a better life. And now, here he was, standing right in front of her. How did this happen?" she asked, still in shock. Daniel pulled up a chair beside her bed and sat down. "It's a long story," he said, his voice calm. "After you stopped coming, I struggled for a while. But then, something changed. A kind woman from a shelter found me one night. She took me in, gave me a place to sleep, and helped me get back into school." Emma listened, hanging on to every word. "I worked hard," he continued. "I studied every chance I got. I never forgot what you told me, that I could be smart, that I could be a doctor one day. Those words stayed with me. They pushed me forward when things got tough." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She had never imagined that her small acts of kindness had meant so much to him. "I got scholarships," Daniel said with a small chuckle. "A lot of them. I studied medicine, worked my way through college, and eventually became a doctor." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And now I'm here. And I'm going to make sure you're okay." Emma felt tears roll down her cheeks. She had spent years worrying about Daniel, never knowing if he had survived. And now, he was the one saving her. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Daniel's smile grew. "I should be the one saying that. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The little girl who once gave food to a hungry boy, and the little boy who had once sat in the cold with no hope. Both had grown up, their lives forever connected. Emma wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "So, doctor, do I have anything to worry about?" she asked, trying to lighten the mood. Daniel laughed softly. "Not at all," he said confidently. "You're in good hands." For the first time since she had been admitted to the hospital, Emma felt truly at peace. She had always feared hospitals, feared the unknown. But now, knowing that Daniel was the one taking care of her, she wasn't scared anymore. She knew, deep in her heart, that everything was going to be okay. The day of the surgery arrived, and Emma lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. She felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, fear, but also an unexpected sense of comfort. She had always imagined that going into surgery would feel terrifying, but knowing that Daniel was her doctor changed everything. A nurse walked in, checking her IV and vitals. "Are you ready, Miss Emma?" she asked with a kind smile. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I can be." Just then, the door opened, and Daniel walked in, dressed in his surgical uniform. He looked calm and focused, exactly how a doctor should be. But when he met Emma's eyes, his expression softened. "You're going to be fine," he assured her. "I'll be with you the whole time." Emma smiled weakly. I trust you, Daniel. Something flickered in his eyes. Maybe gratitude, maybe something more. That means a lot, he said quietly. The nurses started preparing her for the operation, and soon, Emma felt the effects of the anesthesia taking over. Her eyelids grew heavy, and the last thing she saw before everything faded was Daniel standing beside her, watching over her like a guardian angel. The surgery took hours. Outside the operating room, Emma's parents paced anxiously, their hearts filled with worry. Her mother kept praying, while her father spoke to the nurses, trying to get updates. They had heard about Dr. Daniel Carter's reputation. He was one of the best, but they had no idea about his connection to their daughter. Inside the operating room, Daniel worked with steady hands. He focused completely on the task before him, blocking out everything else. He had done surgeries before, many, in fact, but this one was different. This was Emma, the girl who had saved him when he had nothing. The girl who had seen him as more than just a homeless boy. He wouldn't fail her. He couldn't. After what felt like forever, the surgery was finally over. Daniel stepped back, letting out a slow breath. Everything had gone perfectly. She was going to be okay. A few hours later, Emma slowly opened her eyes. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the machines beside her. Her body felt weak, but there was no pain. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the light. And then she saw him. Daniel sat beside her bed, his expression filled with relief. Hey there, he said gently. How do you feel? Emma tried to speak, but her throat was dry. He quickly grabbed a cup of water and helped her take a small sip. You did it, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Daniel chuckled softly. We did it, he corrected. You were strong, Emma, just like I knew you would be. She looked at him, her heart full of emotion she couldn't even describe. Gratitude, admiration, and something even deeper. Tears welled up in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel smiled. You saved my life first, he said simply. I was just returning the favor. And in that moment, Emma knew, some people come into your life for a reason, and no matter how much time passes, fate always finds a way to bring them back. Days passed, and Emma's recovery went smoothly. Every morning, nurses would check on her, and every evening, her parents would visit, fussing over her like she was still a little girl. But the highlight of her day was always when Daniel walked in. He didn't always talk about medical things. Sometimes, he would just sit with her, and they would talk about the past, about the bakery where she used to meet him, about the books she had given him, about the dreams he once shared with her. It felt like they were picking up a conversation that had been paused years ago, as if time had never really separated them. One afternoon, as she sat up in bed, she looked at him thoughtfully. I searched for you, you know, she admitted. After you disappeared, I looked everywhere. I asked people, but no one knew where you had gone. Daniel leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. I wanted to find you too, he said, but I had nothing back then. No way to reach you. All I had were memories of your kindness, and that was what kept me going. Emma smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I never thought we'd meet like this, she said. Life is strange, isn't it? Daniel chuckled. Strange, but also wonderful. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I still can't believe you became a doctor, she said. I mean, I always knew you were smart, but you really did it. You made your dream come true. He looked at her seriously. Because you believed in me when no one else did, he said. Emma, you were the first person who ever made me feel like I was worth something. You have no idea how much that meant to me. Her heart swelled with emotion. She had always thought of those moments as small acts of kindness, sharing her lunch, giving him a book, telling him he was smart. But to Daniel, they had been life-changing. A comfortable silence settled between them, both lost in their thoughts. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I don't want to lose touch again," he admitted. "Not this time." Emma looked at him, her eyes shining. "You won't," she promised. "Not ever again." A week later, she was discharged from the hospital. Daniel walked her to the car where her parents were waiting. Before she got in, she turned to him. "So, Dr. Carter," she said with a playful smile, "do doctors take breaks, or are you always saving lives?" Daniel laughed. "I think I can make time for an old friend," he said. "Good," she said, "because I owe you a proper thank you dinner." His smile softened. "I'd like that." As Emma drove away, she looked out the window, watching Daniel as he stood there, waving goodbye. But this time, it wasn't really a goodbye. It was a new beginning. Some people come into your life for a reason. Some kindnesses are never forgotten. And sometimes fate brings two souls back together, not by accident, but because they were always meant to find each other again.